Thank you, Preacher Dan, for those kind words. Thank you, the Crockett Road congregation, for inviting me back. It's something to be invited someplace. It's something to be invited back to come and be able to speak. And tonight we are going to talk just a little bit about that courage of Jonah. We're going to talk about his life a little bit. But as we begin this evening, I think there's a real striking parallel between teenagers and Jonah. Jonah is what I like to call the reluctant prophet. He was asked by God, he was commanded by God to do something, and he didn't want to do what God wanted him to do. And you are at a point in your life as teenagers where if you haven't already, very shortly and for a few years, you're not going to want to do what you've been asked to do for a lot of it. You're going to think that you know better than the person who has asked you to do something. And in some cases, you may be right. You're going to think that your time can be spent better doing something else. And again, you may be right. But there are things that God expects of us, just like he expected of Jonah. And I'm here to tell you this evening that you don't know better than God. You do not know better than God. There is no better way to spend your time than serving the Lord our God. But keep that in mind tonight as we talk about Jonah and his courage. But to talk about his courage, we first have to talk a little bit about his cowardly beginning. He wasn't always as courageous as he ends up at the end of the story. I sat down and was studying Jonah this week, and I noticed that he starts off kind of cowardly. But when it counts, he becomes courageous. I'd ask for you to join me tonight in Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 through 6. And it says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare, and he went into it, and to go with them to Tarshish away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break. When the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they hurled cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down to the inner part of the ship, and lay down, and he was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise and call out to your God. Perhaps that God will give us a thought to us that we may not perish." Jonah was a little bit in disagreement with God. He did not agree that he needed to go to Nineveh. And it wasn't as if he says, no, I'm just going to stay at home. He said, I'm going to go as far away from Nineveh as I can. If you were to look at a map and see where Nineveh was, and you see where Tarshish was, you really could not go much further away from Nineveh than Tarshish. And so he says he was going to go away. He was going to hide from God, as if we could hide from God. And I think the message for us is very, very clear here. It's okay to disagree. It really is okay to disagree. Your parents are going to say some things at times that you don't agree with. Your teachers and your coaches, they're going to say some things that you don't agree with. Your fellow peers are going to say some things maybe you don't agree with from time to time. And it's okay to disagree, but hear me when I say this. Don't make poor choices because of a disagreement. Don't get into a car when someone's been drinking alcohol because of a disagreement. Don't get in a fight because you disagree with somebody. Don't make rash decisions because of a disagreement. Because when we make rash decisions because of disagreements, then we're going to have poor consequences for that. Don't make rash decisions when you don't agree with God. God has told us there are some things he expects of us as his people. He expects for us to come together on the first day of the week. He expects for us to partake in the Lord's Supper. He expects for us to go out in all the world and to share the gospel. He expects for us to live a certain kind of life, and sometimes that life can be difficult. In the book of 1 Peter, we're told by that apostle that there are going to be difficulties if you are going to live a Christian life. Don't make poor choices because you disagree with having to live a difficult life. Don't make choices out of fear either. Jonah was scared. And I know we're talking about his courage tonight, but he was scared. Nineveh was a wicked place. Nineveh was a place where good, polite people didn't go to Nineveh. It wasn't a good place. And not only was he scared of the place Nineveh, he was scared of what God might do with Nineveh. He was scared that God might actually redeem these people. And we sometimes fall into that same trap. We get scared, and fear is natural. It's an emotion. It's from God. But we make poor choices sometimes because of our fear. We make poor choices that lead us to do things that we should not do. We make choices that put something between us and God because of fear. That's exactly what Jonah did by boarding that ship bound for Tarshish. He made a very poor choice because of fear. And disobedience does have its consequences. I mentioned when I began tonight that you are teenagers and you are in a time of life where you're going to disagree from time to time with your parents. You're going to think you know better than your parents. Trust me, making poor decisions and being disobedient has consequences. And Jonah came to know this very quickly. Romans 6:23 says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is an eternal life with Christ Jesus the Lord." I know there are times when you are going to disagree. I know there are going to be times that you have reason to disagree. You may be right to disagree at times, but don't make poor decisions motivated by fear. Don't live a life of disobedience, because if you can't be obedient to your parents and to the teachers in your school and your coaches, how are you ever going to be obedient to God? And we see that Jonah, because of his disagreement with God, because of his fear, that he suffers some consequences. In Jonah chapter 2, we begin to see some of these the consequences of what happened to him there. The first thing is that Jonah takes ownership of his mistake. Now, in Jonah chapter 1, verses 7 through 9, it says this, "And they said to one another, 'Come, let us cast lots that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us.' So they cast lots, and lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, 'Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? And where do you come from? What is your country? And what people are you?' And he said to them, 'I am a Hebrew. I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land.'" In verses 11 and 12, Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us?" And the sea grew more and more tempestuous. And he said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. The sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." So we see Jonah disagreeing with God. We see him making a very poor decision to run away from God, trying to hide from God out of fear. And he's asleep below deck. I was driving into town when that big old thunderhead came in. And I was in my car. We actually stopped by Seven Brews out here to get something to drink. And the poor little girl that had to come out and take our order, she was just getting hammered by this rain. And I thought, how could Jonah be asleep in the bow of that boat? How could he be asleep down there? But they wake him up and they tell him what's going on. And instead of being in disagreement, instead of acting out of fear, he owns his mistake. He lets them know who he is. He tells who he is. And he doesn't blame anyone else for his mistake. He doesn't blame God for his mistake. He doesn't blame him for sending him to Nineveh and him running away. He owns that mistake. You're going to make mistakes. Your parents are going to make mistakes. Your youth ministers, your elders, everyone that has ever drawn breath in their life is going to make a mistake at some point. And the lesson we can learn, the courage that Jonah shows for us here, is the ability to take ownership of that mistake. He knew he was the reason that storm had come up. He knew he was the reason that all of this, because of his disobedience to God, that all of this was happening. And instead of trying to blame somebody else, he took ownership of his mistake, and that takes courage. And so they throw him overboard. They do exactly what he tells them to. And he finds himself in the belly of the big fish. I can't imagine the things that Jonah felt. I can't imagine the things that Jonah saw. I can't imagine the things that Jonah smelled. Because fish stink, but inside of one can't smell much better. He's inside this fish, and he has a lot of time to think while he's inside this fish. And while he's inside this fish, he prays to God. He says the following to God, and I think this is a beautiful prayer. And I think it's a bold prayer. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. At the roots of the mountains I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you, into your holy temple. Those who pray regard to vain idols, forsake their hope of the steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you what I have vowed. I will say, salvation belongs to the Lord. I think it took courage to speak that boldly to God after you had been so disobedient to God. I think it took a lot of courage to be able to acknowledge who God is, to be able to acknowledge what God can do in your life after being so fearful, after being so disobedient to God. I tell people I am a recovering youth minister. I don't do youth ministry full time anymore. I preach now, but for several years I did youth ministry. I still go to church camp. And there are times when we will have young people respond to the gospel invitation that we're going to, just like we're going to have tonight. And they will respond to that invitation, and they'll write on their cards, they'll pour their hearts out on those cards, and they'll say, I think I've gone too far away from God. I think I've done so much that God can never forgive me. If God can forgive Jonah, who fearfully and disobediently disobeyed him and boarded a ship bound as far away from God, from where God had told him to go, if he could forgive Jonah, he could forgive you too. I don't know you. I know that I'm a stranger to most of you, but I know teenagers well enough to know that some of you are dealing with some things right now that are a big struggle. You're dealing with things that grown adults couldn't handle. You're dealing with things, and maybe you're thinking, I have gone too far away from God. He can never forgive me. Let me tell you tonight that God will forgive you, that God can forgive you. You've got to have courage like Jonah to be bold enough to come before God and allow him to forgive you. And so we see Jonah finally get to go to Nineveh. He finally does what God tells him to. He goes to Nineveh and he sets aside his own feelings in favor of God's will. In Jonah 3, verses 1 through 5, we read, Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and call out against it the message that I will tell you. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey, and he called out, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed in God. They called for a fast, and they put on sackcloth from the greatest of them to the least of them. I don't believe, because I've read the whole book, that Jonah really believed that the Ninevites were worth saving. I don't believe that Jonah really thought they were good people. I think he had very real feelings about the inhabitants of Nineveh. And yet, after 3 days in the belly of the big fish, he realized that he had to set his feelings aside to do the will of God. And that takes courage. It will take courage for all of you to set aside your own feelings to do the will of God. There are some of us that would like to believe that it's okay to indulge in sinful things. That's our feeling. That's what we think. That's not God's will. And it takes courage to do God's will. It takes courage to stand against the crowd. It takes courage to, when all of your friends are doing something that's sinful, to say, I'm not going to do that thing. And you may have trouble even seeing why it's wrong, but you have to be able to set aside your own feelings. It takes courage to say, I'm going to worship God the way He wants to be worshiped and not the way the world and man wants Him to be worshiped. That takes courage. And you have to set your own feelings aside. And Jonah demonstrates that for us greatly. So what are the results of Jonah's courage? Well, the first one, and probably the most important one to him, was he was delivered from the belly of the big fish. Jonah 2:10 said, and the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah upon the dry land. I was talking with my wife the other day. We were riding in the car. We were talking about Jonah, and I said, I noticed something in verse 10 I've never noticed before. It's that first part. And the Lord spoke to the fish. What did He say? And how did He say it? What language did He use? How great a God do we serve that He could speak to the fish? I know some anglers out in the audience that wish they could speak to fish and they would listen. They try, but they don't listen. God speaks to fish and they listen. Because of Jonah's courage, because of his realization that he had made a mistake, because he realized he needed to do God's will, because he was courageous enough to do that, God delivered him from the belly of the big fish. Some of you are in the belly of the big fish right now. Some of you, because of choices you've made, are in the belly of the big fish. And I'm here to tell you, God can deliver you from the belly of the big fish today. But you have to have enough courage to admit you were wrong. You have to have enough courage to say to God, I believe and I have faith in you, and you will protect me. And God will deliver you from the belly of your big fish if you have courage like Jonah. The whole nation of Nineveh repented. The passage said that from the least to the highest, that the whole nation repented. One man goes into this great city, and he begins calling out from the street corner, 40 days, and God is going to judge Nineveh. And we see that the whole nation of Nineveh repents. Jonah chapter 3, verses 6 through 10 says, the word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne. He removed his robe. He covered himself with sackcloth and sat in ashes. And he issued proclamation and published through Nineveh, by the decree of the king and his nobles, let neither man nor beast nor flock nor taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way, from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may relent and turn from his fierce anger so that we may not perish. When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he said he would do to them, and he did not do it. One man walked into this great city of Nineveh, and he began proclaiming boldly, God is going to judge you. You have 40 days, and God is going to judge you. And I imagine that this started with maybe the people who were living on the streets. Maybe they were the first ones to hear it. And so they decide they're going to change their life. And he goes around, he keeps proclaiming. He keeps proclaiming something even though he doesn't agree with it. Even though he's fearful of what God is actually going to do, he goes and he keeps proclaiming it because it's God's will. And he causes such a stir that the king, the highest person in the whole nation, the one who commands the respect of everyone, rises from his throne and begins mourning over the sin of Nineveh. He decrees we need to fast, we need to wear sackcloth and ashes, and hopefully God will not judge us. All because of the courage of one reluctant prophet. This happens. God can work through fearful and reluctant people if we will allow him to. I don't know what your schools look like. I grew up in a fairly large city. I went to a fairly large high school. I went to a Christian college. I don't know what your schools look like. But maybe I'm talking to a bunch of Jonahs. Maybe I'm talking to a bunch of people who, you're reluctant, you're fearful, but you can see that God has something better in store for you. You're a courageous group of people. The fact you are here tonight tells me you're a courageous group of people. Maybe just one of you goes into your school in August and you start talking about God. You start talking about Jesus Christ. You start talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You start talking about the forgiveness of sin. And yeah, some people are going to tell you you're crazy. Some people are going to look at you like a calf staring at a new gate. They are going to think you're nuts. But what if one person said, I want to hear more about this. I want to hear more about this God who can take care of me. I want to hear more about this Jesus who was crucified on a cross, who was laid in a borrowed tomb, who resurrected and now sits at the right hand of God. I want to hear about someone that can forgive all my sins because I think I've got too many sins to forgive. You could be that Jonah. But it takes courage to be that Jonah. Let's talk for just a moment about how you can have courage like Jonah. You can serve God. And I know some of you are saying, I'm not good at talking in front of people. I know some of you are saying, I'm shy. I have anxiety. I can't do those things. You can serve God. You don't have to stand in the pulpit to serve God. You don't have to be a great singer to serve God. You can serve God by the way you live your life, by the example that you set every day. Joshua 24:15 says, and if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether your gods, the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You're not in the decision-making part of your house yet for the whole house, but you can make a decision for yourself today. It takes courage, but you can serve God with courage. You can influence others for God. Proverbs 27:17 says, iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. You have influence. You don't realize it, but you have influence. I'm sure if I were to go around and talk to every one of you, I'd say, do you have a best friend? I bet almost everyone would say, I have a best friend. Some of you might say, I've got lots of best friends. You have influence. You can influence others for the sake of Christ. But it takes courage. It takes boldness to do that. You can stand firm. 1 Corinthians 16:13-14 says, be watchful. Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. Be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. If we were to keep reading in Jonah, you would see that he didn't do everything out of love. You would see that he actually got pretty mad at God for actually saving those wicked Ninevite people. And so while I say to have courage like Jonah, don't be bitter like Jonah. Stand firm. Be courageous. Allow God to work through you. And there's things that want to knock you down. There's sickness, and there's school projects, and there's mean people. You could not pay me to go back to junior high or high school today because kids can be mean. but you can stand firm. It takes courage, but you can stand firm because God is with you. You can be delivered to God through Christ. John 14:6, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. You're going to meet people in your lives that tell you that all paths lead to God. You're going to meet people that say, when I'm in my deer blind, I'm with God. When I'm out in my bass boat, I'm with God. When I'm on the football field, I'm with God. And God is in all those places. Don't get me wrong, he is in all those places. But you can only come to God through Jesus Christ. You can only come to God by repenting, by believing that Jesus is the Son of God, by repenting of your former way of life, by confessing Jesus to be the Lord of your life, to be immersed in a watery grave of baptism. Once you're immersed in that grave, your sins are washed away. You're a new person. Once you're immersed in that grave of baptism, you come up as a new creation before God and before men. And a lot of preachers stop right there. There's another part to this. You must live a faithful life. When God says to go to Nineveh, you got to go to Nineveh. When God says go into all the world and preach the gospel, you got to find a way to do it. Again, you don't have to stand in a pulpit like this, but you got to find a way to do it. You can live a courageous life. It's your choice whether you do or not. This evening, I love speaking to young people. Let me tell you why I love speaking to young people. Y'all haven't made up your minds yet. You haven't made up your minds about what life is going to be like. You haven't made up your minds and made hard and fast rules for the rest of your life. You are still open to thinking about things. And I know in an audience like this, we have people who have not yet put on Christ in baptism. So I want to encourage you tonight, if you've been thinking about that, if that's a decision that you know you need to make and you've been putting it off for some reason, don't wait any longer. The water is ready. I could hear it cycling in here. The water's ready. We would love to baptize you into Jesus Christ tonight. Maybe you're here tonight and you're like Jonah. You're in the belly of that big fish and you need some help. You need someone to come alongside you. You need someone to hear what's going on in your life. You need someone to put an arm around you and say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I don't know what your need is tonight, but I know that there are needs out there. And if we can help you meet those needs, let us know as we stand and as we sing.